Hello, my name is Alden Schuman, and today I will be doing my interview for the special advisor to the Commissioner of Major League Baseball, that being Rob Manfred. Now, first, we're going to look at a bit of the history of the league, and looking at the founding of MLB, baseball's roots began during the Civil War, where soldiers would play it on their downtime on deployment, and then they brought the sport back home. And this eventually led to the formation of the National Association of Professional Baseball Players, which would grow into the National League. And there were multiple other competitive leagues across the nation, but the American Association stood up above the rest. And this would grow into Major League Baseball's American League in 1901, merging with the National League to create the first form of Major League Baseball as we would know it today. And the game's changed a lot over the coming years, with the batter originally getting to choose where they wanted to pitch, and this resulted in high batting averages and low strikeout totals. And obviously, as the game evolved, pitchers discovered how to manipulate the spin on the baseball, and Babe Ruth came around in the early 1900s to popularize the home run fever, and that fever's never quite ended. And then next in Major League Baseball history, we'll be looking at the Negro Leagues, which the Negro Leagues were a professional baseball league that saw most of its prominence from 1920s to the 1940s. And this league was comprised of all African Americans, as Major League Baseball was fully segregated up until the end of the Negro Leagues. And there were many sensational players that played for these teams, such as Rube Foster and Satchel Paige, and some of these were said to be better than the white players that MLB teams had. And this color barrier in baseball was finally broken in 1947 when Jackie Robinson made his historic and experimental debut with the then Brooklyn Dodgers. But he unfortunately endured terrible acts of racism by fans and players, but upon support from his teammates and immaculate success in the field, eventually more black players were signed into MLB, and the Negro Leagues faded into history in the process. Next, we'll be looking at lockouts, and MLB has a bit of a history of disputes between ownership and the players, with two of the most notable occurrences taking place in 1981 and 1994. And first, looking at the 1981 instance, owners were at odds with the recent addition of MLB free agency. See, prior to this, teams had majority of the control over a player's rights. So with that ensuing battle, there was a strike which resulted in 713 games being canceled that year. And this is unfortunately nothing compared to the 1994 strike, where that year owners were again in fears over their financial situations across baseball, so they proposed a salary cap, and the ensuing negotiations led to a player strike that would last through half the 1994 season, the playoffs, and then the owners finally backed down in 1995, and they returned to the previous agreement. And then next we'll be looking at the steroid era, which is the final phase of baseball right before the modern game of strikeouts, walks, and home runs came to be. And the steroid phase occurred from roughly the 1990s into the early 2000s. And before player testing was prevalent, players like Barry Bonds, Sammy Sosa, and Roger Clemens ballooned to superhuman sizes and strength, and in the process, long-standing home run titles, Cy Young awards, and MVP records were sworn past. And that forced then Commissioner Bud Selig to introduce the Joint Drug Prevention Program, which forced players to be tested, and that's greatly reduced the steroid problem in baseball. So next, we will be looking at the current domestic impact. And now looking at 2019, baseball netted $10.7 billion in revenue. And looking at this, revenue has actually increased each of the past 2 years, and that shows that the interest in baseball is strong regardless of the societal conception that baseball has been declining in popularity. And then the coronavirus, obviously in the pandemic situation that we're in currently with COVID-19, MLB and its affiliated franchises have stepped up in a time where only companies that have this kind of financial power can do. And each franchise pledged $1 million towards their employees throughout that time, and that goes a long ways towards making a difference in thousands of lives. And while that's great for everyone across the nation, playing games without fans for MLB teams is expected to lose about $640,000 a game for each average MLB game. But keeping strong with other cultural relevancies, the Black Lives Matter movement, the same can be said for how MLB has approached the nationwide BLM movement. having the logo pinned all around each ballpark, as well as each organization's public support of their players' right to protest. It's insurmountably important in today's society that values organizations with equal thinking. And then speaking about doing things back towards society, philanthropy is huge for MLB organizations. Philanthropy has long been an important factor of MLB organizations, and in recent years that trend's the same. In 2016, MLB and the Players Association donated about $40 million, with the Boston Red Sox actually being the highest giver that year at about giving $7 million. And then next, be looking at the current global impact of baseball in Major League Baseball. And then first, looking at the Dominican Baseball Academies. Major League Baseball has implemented Dominican baseball academies all across the Dominican Republic. I believe each Major League Baseball franchise has one there throughout this past decade, and that's done wonders for both the game of baseball on the field and spreading for the sport globally. These camps give kids at an age of 16 a chance to get signed by a professional baseball club and receive the kind of economic opportunity that few in their country would get. And this actually led to many of today's biggest stars, such as Jose Altuve and Miguel Cabrera, coming from these academies. And this, and also the fact that the early 2000s Red Sox and Yankees games were all that were broadcast in the Dominican. So this pretty much turned a whole population in the Dominican Republic into either Red Sox or Yankees fans. And returning locals such as David Ortiz and Pedro Martinez became celebrities in these areas as a result, helping spread the sport a very, very good amount. And then next, looking at the international market, baseball also has strong professional leagues internationally, separate from MLB, such as in Japan and Cuba. And the strongest players from those countries often choose to take their talents to Major League Baseball. People can take all sorts of harrowing adventures there, such as Yasiel Puig had to go on a number of illegal exploits in order to get from his journey from Cuba to America. And Ichiro Suzuki, once he left Japan to sign with America, became pretty much the most famous man in Japan after signing with the Mariners. So basically, obviously, Major League Baseball is very huge in other countries too. And then looking at international series, Major League Baseball has taken notice of the fact that there is an increasing international fan base. And in recent years, they have had multiple teams play a series in different countries. And there was the Sydney series in Australia in 2014. In 2018, there was the Mexico series. And then in 2019, there were two international series in Japan and London. And with the success that these series have had, this should be a trend that can only be expected to continue and should be expanded in the future. And then lastly here, we'll be looking at the WBC, the World Baseball Classic, which is separate from MLB. And this is a FIFA-like competition that allows countries' best players to compete against each other in a tournament-like setting. And many Major League Baseball players participate in the tournament, and that's great exposure for MLB, its players, and to continue gain popularity internationally. All right, so next we'll be looking at a SWOT analysis of Major League Baseball. And first looking at the strengths, the increasing revenue the past few years allow teams to spend highly on players and other amenities in a manner that few other sports can match. And then MLB's philanthropic ways ensure that money goes back into helping the world, and that's something that society values heavily. And then baseball has some of the sport's brightest minds as notable organizational leaders such as Bill James and Billy Beane come to mind, and they have brought to light new forms of sporting analysis that franchises and professional sports in all different facets, basketball, football, they've come to value. So next, we'll be looking at the weaknesses, which MLB and the Players Association definitely have some tweaking to do in their next bargaining agreement. As with player compensation, as we've seen in recent years, the qualifying offer system significantly favors teams, as players are often forced to get below market value contracts. And that's just obviously that we've seen how that can be exploited, so hopefully that should be changed in the next couple of years. So pace of play is another aspect that needs improvement, because even as recent changes are made to games are still averaging around 3 hours. And one idea I can think of to aid this idea is to regulate shifting. Therefore, at the very least, there'll be more action on the field no matter how long games are. And lastly, MLB teams have terrible payroll discrepancies, as teams like the Rays and the A's are at a huge disadvantage when it comes to systems like arbitration and free agency, as they can't spend nearly as much as other teams can. And then we'll be looking at opportunities. So MLB does have some exciting opportunities on the horizon. Firstly, with high international interest, possible expansion teams could be in the near future. That'd be a great way to capitalize on this interest in other countries. And then the technology baseball is currently equipped with, like StatCast and neuroscouting, are some of the most cutting edge technologies in sports, but perhaps the world. So the use of that, currently baseball has great technology at their disposal. And MLB's recent infusion of young players will go a great way in bringing popularity to a sport living in the social media age. Because one of the huge gripes is baseball is losing popularity with young fans. So a great way to combat that is having star young players who are right in the middle of that same age group. And then lastly here we will be looking at threats, whereas firstly the massive popularity of the NFL, NBA, and also college sports definitely draws attention away from baseball, and something that I'll be talking more about that in a sec. But next, looking at COVID-19 certainly poses not only an economical threat, but a fiscal one as well, as both MLB personnel and fans are at risk throughout this time. So that's something that could go to have an impact for a long time to come, as fans likely won't be back next year either. And this last one is a personal opinion, but the constant interchanging players teams have on a year-to-year basis, I feel like has to have somewhat of an effect on fan interest. For example, 10 years ago, if the Yankees were brought up in a casual conversation, even the most casual fan would know of A-Rod or Jeter. But now, with entire teams' rosters shifting literally on a sometimes year-to-year basis, teams can have entirely different rosters. The ability to form long-standing connections with the players is near impossible from a fan standpoint. And then next year, we'll be looking at the potential growth of Major League Baseball. And as I've said, MLB and baseball in general have a long, strong following in international areas like Asia and Latin America, and Canada has shown it can support an MLB team with the Toronto Blue Jays and the Montreal Expos in the past. Thus, an expansion team in baseball in a popular area like Puerto Rico or Mexico seems like the next logical step in expanding. And in regards to popularity, keeping an eye on the off-the-field amenities that make the NFL and NBA successful, such as concessions, any mini games, fan activities, restaurants going on in the background, those will go a long way in increasing fanfare for Major League Baseball. Now finally, you're looking at what I will bring to the table if hired to be this special assistant. I have experience creating a positive culture in a sports environment, having worked closely with the manager and team captain of Newport International Polo. I learned firsthand many of the crucial traits required to succeed in the sports world. I learned the importance of working with others who share similar ideas and goals as you do, and how that should then be passed on to new personnel brought into the organization so everyone together can work stronger towards a combined goal. And I also have a financial mind. Growing up, I was always good with numbers, and those are sentiments that have been reflected in my work throughout my time at Rollins College, as I perfected them with programs such as SPSS and Excel. And because of that, I started reading about Bill James and sabermetrics when I was about 12 or 13. I became versed in statistics such as WAR, ERA plus, and WOBA, weighted on base average, before StatCast was popularized and analytics a few years later. So I definitely feel I am well versed in the language baseball currently speaks. And lastly, MLB is trying to make the sport more appealing to a younger generation of fans. And as a younger member of society who is relatively new to the workforce, I'm well acquainted with social media and the cultural trends and values that MLB is currently trying to market towards. And then with that, there are my sources. And thank you very much.